Hi, this is Richard Fields with this week's Report from the Fields. After bellyaching for over a year that Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is too slow to lower interest rates, President Trump has announced that Powell's replacement, when his term ends in May, will be Kevin Warsh. To say the least, that choice is a bit counterintuitive. Trump is a self proclaimed low interest guy. Warsh, in his previous role as a Federal Reserve member, tended to lean in a more hawkish direction. Specifically, he argued against fiscal dominance. That's the idea that the Fed should step in with lower interest rates and quantitative easing to fund federal deficits. In ordinary language, creating money brand new to effectively fund federal budget deficits ad infinitum. He's argued for a rules-based regimen for Fed policy instead of the current policy of making it up as you go along. He's pro-crypto, calling Bitcoin digital gold. He believes that the Fed should be paying attention to the price of precious metals since rising prices are a signal of inflation coming. But he's against returning to a gold standard. He's against the Fed instituting a digital currency. Good news for anyone who values their privacy. Also, contra-Trump, he is not a supporter of tariffs, advocating free markets instead. He certainly has the elite credentials to be a central banker, undergraduate degree from Stanford in economics and political science, JD cum laude at Harvard Law, 7 years at Morgan Stanley, specializing in mergers and acquisitions, National Economic Council staff member during the George W. Bush administration, married to Jane Walsh, née Lauder, daughter of Ronald Lauder of Estee Lauder, and a multi-billionaire in her own right. Federal Reserve Board member appointed by W for 5 years, where he leaned to the hawkish side of monetary policy, higher interest rates and less quantitative easing. But he still faces a confirmation problem. Republican Senator Thom Tillis says he won't vote for Warsh until the criminal probe of current Federal Reserve Chairman Powell is resolved, assuming united Democratic opposition on the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. The lack of Tillis' vote will cause a stalemate moving the nomination out of committee. Tillis, who is retiring, is immune to threats from Trump. Warsh is certainly better than the other candidates Trump was considering for the job, who were both shameless in toadying up to Trump's low interest rates. The markets seem to be giving their seal of approval to the Warsh nomination. Precious metals are down, indicating a lessening of fear of inflation. But the larger question is whether the Fed does more harm than good. Milton Friedman was a proponent of rules-based Fed interest rate policy. He called for a fixed percentage increase in the money supply, roughly similar to economic growth. That could theoretically work, but the problem is rules are easy to change with a change in Fed leadership. That usually happens when a president of a different party takes control, or whenever a president wants to goose the economy prior to an election. That's precisely what's happening now. That still presumes that a small group of Fed voting members have the skill to set interest rates correctly. They don't. Interest rates are simply the price of borrowing money. Price controls always result in market distortions leading to recessions, depressions, or worse. Ron Paul is absolutely correct in his call to end the Fed. Let the market determine the best way to set prices by mutual agreement between buyers and sellers. That usually results in a gold, silver, or bimetal standard or something similar. It's also what was called for in the U.S. Constitution. There's also the very good chance that Warsh will prove himself to be just as much of a Trump toady as the other candidates for the job, just not as publicly shameless. We'll see. That's this week's Report from the Fields. See you again next week.